Welcome to Global Connections on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today we'll talk about the tidal changes in the US Europe relationship. Trump is damaging the post war collaboration with Europe. Our guest for the show is Dr. Roopmati Khandekar, geopolitical analyst. Welcome to the show, Roopmati.
Hello, Ajay. Thank you for having me on your show. Always my pleasure.
Without US support, Europe is stuck in a kind of internecine politics. Trump is requiring conditions that serve US interests, in his view, but not the interests of Europe. Trump is damaging the relationship of the US with Europe. We need to follow what is happening to correct and hopefully repair that damage. So, can you give us some of the events that have happened lately, the events that we can connect the dots on and try to figure out what is going on? Because it all seems very disconnected.
Yeah, Jay. So just about a week back, we had this great show on how the Saudi meeting was conducted for Ukraine peace talk with Russia and US minus Ukraine and Europe. So that was stunning for the world, but nothing compares to the dramatic change that's happened in the transatlantic relationship after that, Jay. So you have a sequence of events which have shaped this and brought this to the forefront. Maybe we would have neglected it for the first 2 3 events and not given it so much of importance, but we can now clearly see that there is a total dramatic pragmatic shift in the US Europe relations, and that's what we are going to cover in our topic today, Jay. So one of the things for this realignment, and it's not just in diplomatic relations with US and Europe, it's been it's taken such center stage all aspects of the relationship. It was a little bit of the trade war also that came in, so it's multi faceted, and it continues to grow. So we have the Munich Security Conference, where you have JD Vance talking, giving an anti-liberal speech. So you don't have a diplomat who takes such a stand. It's never a staunch stance in on an international forum. It's always to be a little bit of neutrality and balanced view. But this was totally anti-liberal. And one of the things that he said on one of the press conferences following that was that one of the first countries, Islamist countries, that we used to think would have a nuclear weapon was most likely to be Iran, but now we think is going to be the UK. So such heavy remarks and so fast. So it was stunning. And then you have Trump meeting Macron on Monday. And Macron says that France aims to build a long lasting peace, a full relationship with US is wants to increase the spending amount for defense, and it hopes that the war comes to an end. He praises Trump and says that Ukraine should not be on the receiving side of the horrors of this war. So we all know that Trump just listens to all and does his own. So another example of what would be coming. And Jay, just a few hours back, the dramatics at the UN Security Council have just laid bare everything that there is to the US Europe relation, the strained relationship, that US has refused to acknowledge Russia as the aggressor in the Ukraine Russia war. And the platform of the UN, the US has joined Russia, Iran, and Korea to vote against the resolution drafted by Ukraine on the third anniversary of the war, which claimed Russia to be the aggressor. So you have such a twist. And when the US resolution, termed as Path to Peace, without mentioning Russia as the aggressor, is tabled, France puts in an amendment saying that you should put in Russia to be the aggressor, and Russia has chosen to bring the war to European soil. So the US abstains from voting for these amendments, and then the resolution is passed in its original form without Russia being the aggressor. So with 10 votes in favor for the US resolution. So you have a uh, coming together of US and Russia after a very, very long time in the UN Security Council. It always used to be, and we know generally, we keep it steady that the UN Security Council needs only one veto vote. So that would never ever be effective, the UN as such. And Jay, on the flip side, you have Donald Trump saying that the 500 billion that we have given you, give us minerals in return. And Zelensky uh, comes up with this notion that the money that we get from the US has been a grant. But then Trump disagrees, saying that the money that you got from Europe was always binding. You're supposed it's a loan. You have to repay the loan. What about the US money? It's so Zelensky says it's a grant. It's not going to be repaid. We don't need to repay it back. So that puts a starting point where we can analyze why Europe has also been responsible in changing this relationship.
Wow, so many things have happened. It's like a fire hydrant. And from Trump's point of view, it's all outrageous. What we have in front of our eyes is a national betrayal, throwing Ukraine under the bus. Mind you, Trump stopped his support and supply of weapons. Trump wants Ukraine to lose. Trump makes these ridiculous statements, lies about how Ukraine started the war and how Zelensky is a dictator. That's simply not true. He calls for regime change in Ukraine. Zelensky, and I think this was just testing Trump, suggested that he would resign if Ukraine could become a part of NATO. But Trump didn't even respond to that. Trump did not include, as you mentioned, did not include either as you mentioned, Trump did not include either Ukraine or Europe in these, quote, settlement talks, these peace talks. And he keeps repeating that demand for the rare earth. And it's supposed to be, indefinite, forever. He lied in front of Macron in the Oval Office. Macron caught him lying and corrected him. Macron is being very diplomatic, as the French are. But it
Mm.
was clear that Trump was lying and Macron was taking issue with that. Could Trump be more insulting to Zelensky and Europe than to lie at them that way? He seems to be angry at Zelensky. He seems to be angry at Ukraine. He is, taking the part of Putin. He is adopting the Putin stand on this. That vote in the UN was really gross. It was a complete abdication of the moral responsibility and the facts of the United States. It's extraordinary, and it's not to our credit that we did that, because people know the people who voted with the United States in that ridiculous resolution were really people, countries that owed something to Putin, and they went along with it, or owed something to Trump and they went along with it. But it was not to their credit. It was not to our credit. I think there were 18 really know nothing countries. Then I was really dismayed to see that Israel voted with the US on that. And it tells you the relationship of Trump and Israel. He can get them to do
Yes.
anything he wants. He's attacking NATO. He's not going to supply any more money to NATO or arms. And the result is NATO is on its own. Or let me put it this way, the countries of NATO will have to establish their own security arrangements, because I don't think NATO can be counted on anymore. Um, and then you get to the tariffs. And that's really interesting what he's doing with the tariffs. let me just give you a introductory comment on that. In Germany, Germany is in an economic decline. That's one of the reasons why the AfD won so many seats. It's in an economic decline, and the big reason for that is that the German cars aren't selling, and they're not selling because China is flooding the European market with its electric BYD cars. But Trump, nevertheless, tells us that he's going to impose a 25% tariff on those cars, on German cars. And that is 10 times what the 2.5% tariff has been for the past several years. And this is going to be very problematic for Germany. He's attacking Germany. And when you realize that these cars are not just a German product, these cars include parts from all over Europe. So the German cars are really European cars, and they're very popular in the U.S. We're talking about BMW, we're talking about Audi, we're talking about a few of the others, Mercedes. And when he puts that tariff on, Germany is going to be in deeper economic decline. He's hurting Germany intentionally, willfully. He's hurting Germany's economy, and everybody can see it. Everybody knows it. This is so brutal, so cruel, so unfair. Your thoughts about the tariffs?
Yeah, Jay, trade is always a hurting point when you are vulnerable. So that is one of the main reasons why Trump has sidelined from Europe in the Ukraine-Russia war too, because when the sanctions were imposed, US was the only one who was imposing isolationist policy against Russia, was imposing sanctions and following them against Russia, while the entire European side was continuing to do trade in oil and gas and every other thing that Russia depended on them. So Russia was not getting hurt from Europe. If you wanted to have a sanctions regime, Europe had to fall in line with the US. And Europe, as we have always discussed, doesn't have a unified um, attack whenever or unified stance on issues. They bicker and they're diversified in their approach, and that does not help in geopolitics. When you have a front, it has to be unified. And Russia was thriving even in the 3 years that it has fought this war. Why? Because Europe is supplying the money. Ukraine, they were supplying weapons. Russia, they were supplying the money. It doesn't work that. You have to take a stand. And US was being highlighted as the bad guy who's against Russia when we are across the Atlantic. And US has nothing to do with Russia. If Russia attacks Ukraine, Europe is the one who has to be scared, not the US. And that is exactly the hurdle that this policy has passed, because NATO is now off the cards. No, the Rapstein naval base or the Naples naval base is very important for the US. Yes, the NATO expansion is off the table. The demand for which this war started, the demand for which Zelensky was doing these things is now out of the way. uh, Donald Trump does not want to have Ukraine included in it. You know, it is very evident when he calls Zelensky a comedian. He calls him a dictator on the basis that he doesn't want to have elections. And Jay, taking 500 billion as a grant from the US while taking European funds to be a loan is double standards that Zelensky has set. He could have easily played a very that is where immaturity in diplomacy comes in. He could have said that I will repay it on a later date, but he has categorically declined to repay back the US debt. And secondly, he's hasty in his approach. When he convenes a meeting of the European High Commissioner, Canada comes in. You have UK Stammer coming in. They have a meeting, and he convenes the meeting, and he says that he would provide the place and platform for a larger security arrangement for Europe. That is another NATO. Is it possible, Jay? I mean, there are so many logistical problems when you want to do this, and you can't undermine the NATO, and you can't undermine the US out of this. If the US is not by your side, doesn't mean you belittle the US to be nothing. Together, US and Russia dictate world politics. That is the golden line in geopolitics today. So Ukraine has to maneuver its way through this entire thing, but trying to bypass US and Russia is not possible by Zelensky. And he is doing this on a round table. And you have Trudeau, who has a personal uh, riffraff with Donald Trump. He declares that I would like to welcome the democratically elected leader Zelensky. You don't need to rub it in. This kind of kiddish politics, kindergarten politics doesn't work. You have to play a very stable game because Ukraine is in the middle of a war. It's facing an aggressor. Now that aggressor has no binding power, so he will be more aggressive. He will come in more. You can't sit and pinch the US with this. Trudeau doesn't need to do that.
From a diplomatic point of view and from a geopolitical point of view, the moves that Trump has been making are really stupid. It's not going to get him anywhere. It's going to get Putin somewhere. I mean, after all, he's given adulation to Viktor Orban, who is a dictator. Musk and Vance have articulated support for the neo Nazis. They didn't congratulate Schultz or Metz on the election last weekend. Only the neo Nazis. What's wrong with this picture? And then when you take it in the context of the stupid argument with Denmark on Greenland, similar stupid arguments with Canada and Mexico, our neighbors and friends, he's visibly breaking all agreements. He signed a trade agreement in his first term. Now he says, "Oh, that was us. Nobody should have signed that agreement." But that they have footage of him signing it and saying it's the best agreement ever. He lies, changes his mind. You can't trust him for a moment, and you really wonder what the reason for all of this is. Now you can say that he's losing it. Some people believe he's losing it. I think that's part of it. Or Putin has something on him. Putin is causing him to do these things for a reason, like compromise and the Steele memorandum, or the embarrassment of the hotel in Moscow, which Trump lied about in his first term. And then there have been a couple of articles about how Trump is actually a Russian asset, believe it or not, on the world stage. And then maybe he wants to distract and use this as a negotiating technique. Maybe he wants to look crazy like Nixon, as a negotiating technique. In any event, just as domestically, he creates fear, confusion, chaos. So he's doing it on both sides of the Atlantic now, and everything is going to pot. He is demonstrating that he is completely unreliable. None of the countries that are in Europe thinking him, none of the EU countries or the NATO countries to treat him as trustworthy, and thus they don't treat us as trustworthy. We had a show with a Canadian yesterday, and he said the people in Canada will never trust the United States again. I said, well, is it the United States or Trump? Trump is the United States. We have to remember that. Trump becomes mean and does things that are, unreasonable for no reason at all. And the question I put to you is, what is Europe doing about it? What arrangements are they making? They had a meeting in Paris. Europe has trouble. The EU has trouble actually coming together on these things. But are they making arrangements for trade deals that do not include the United States, and for security agreements that do not include the United States? Are they making any progress? What is going to happen on that?
Yeah, Jay. See, in the Paris conference, you had all the European leaders present, and they were talking of increasing spending on defense and all that. But the Ukraine war has created a left-right divide right in the middle. You don't have Melanie attending the conference convened by Zelensky. She prefers to skip it. She calls herself the left, and she prefers to align herself with Trump. rather than Zelensky. She talks that when Putin, uh, Trump, and Modi and her leaders like her come up, they're called as a threat to democracy. While when you have Bill Clinton and Blair talking of the liberal right, they were called as statesmen. So she makes a very hard hitting statement that there is a divide and there's a double standard that is set to politicians who are uh, vocal about being left. So Europe is divided on those lines. Secondly, that this policy of Trump, uh, however far fetched it may be, as a multipolar world, when this we had isolated Russia, we had the BRICS getting stronger. And the BRICS was in talks on the basis of these trade tariffs and sanctions policy to have the next step in de-dollarization. Now, when a small country like Libya or Iraq comes in, you can maintain it. But when you have BRICS, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, coming together with now 100 members together, it would have been difficult for the United States to maintain supremacy because petrodollars plays a big part in economics. To maintain political hegemony is to maintain economic supremacy too. So to bring Russia on this side of de-dollarization was of very, very urgent need, Jay. It would not have, if it had been delayed, you have this, there's this multipolar thing. They're aligning themselves against the US for a war which the US is not part of. And that was the game in geopolitics. Now everything changes. And US is good with everybody. They don't need to be bad with Europe. They don't need to be bad with Russia. For the sake of Ukraine, they don't need to spoil anything economically. And that is the scenario I think today.
Well, Biden was out there, with America is back. And that statement was appropriate after Trump's first term, where he's so destructive with NATO and Europe. But he's going all the way now. And in the last month, he's really had a huge destructive effect on our relation with Europe and with the Western countries in Europe. And I was telling you before the show, I'm developing a theory about connecting the dots on this. If you have chaos and confusion, if you have this kind of negative relationships, fear among your former allies, then the world changes. They make different moves. They are concerned, and they may not be as rational as you would like them to be. They're acting in a way out of desperation. So I hope that Europe can, establish separate security agreements and deal with Russia. I hope they can establish separate trade agreements. One thing I want to mention is that Canada has cut a deal, a two-party deal, bilateral trade deal with Germany, which is not exactly the way the EU likes to work. They want to work together and do it all as a group. But that's not what happened. So Canada is now in a deal directly with Germany. And that sort of foretells the future. I think a lot of these countries are going to make direct deals. Canada, considers making deals with anybody, but not the US. They don't trust the US anymore. The same with Mexico. They're going to make separate trade agreements anywhere in the world, including China. Our big enemy, China, they're going to make deals with China. Thank you, Trump, for setting that up really good. So he has shoved off from Western Europe, from Canada, from Mexico. And I should mention also that he has alienated Denmark forever and ever. And he has made no progress whatsoever in getting the canal back. And his bizarre effort to move 2 million Palestinians out of Gaza, no traction on that. He's collapsing on the world stage. And the question I put to you arguably, is what he is doing in the interest of the United States. Because frankly, I can't see that anything that he's done is in the interest of the United States. Your thoughts?
The thing is that Europe was never united, and they face such problems that will cause the European Union. It has got such problems which will cause their borders to implode. Poland doesn't want those many of migrants. Hungary doesn't want those kind of open borders. So this kind of implosion, and like you said, the trade deals which are happening one on one will hurt the European Union unity. They have different ideologies that are coming to power. There are coalition politics happening. So each country has to fend for itself, and each country in Europe alone is too small to face a problem. They always needed the piggyback riding of NATO. They always needed the security investment of NATO. And Jay, this kind of wooing, there was no wooing also of the US. It was like the US has to do, obligated to do for Europe. It was a taken for granted kind of a relationship. So this is kind of a wake up call, if you may call it, that Europe has to think about spending on defense. Europe has to think about mending ways with Russia, with the US. They have to try to offer trade bargains. They have to try to offer whether they can come in. So all these things make such a sweeping change. We have never felt Europe feel the hurt, or you've never heard seen. How many times have European leaders come to meet Trump or the president one on one? So you have Macron scrambling over here, trying to pitch his point to Trump in such a way that he puts a favorable issue over there. And like it or not, Jay, he is heading the hegemon of the system. And America is a great power today. And to belittle it was the point, Jay. And because of that, Europe lost out on so many things, Jay. They never ever. We have spoken of such diverse politics happening, such weak politics happening. There is no. You have them giving. They're very smart. They're very shrewd when they give Ukraine money on the basis of return back. So why should not America give the thing about return back our money? It's not easy to just give 500 billion away. That is not a right kind of attitude. Tomorrow, any country will go to war. They cannot demand from America. And Biden used to have such amazing policies, but he was never a finisher. Now we have another one who's a starter, but we don't know where we are going. It's just that he started off with all these policies, and how is he planning to finish them or how to put them into order is now the issue, because his agenda was in the first 24 hours, I will finish the war in Ukraine, I will finish the war in Israel. So he's going for the goals, but the means are very difficult to get to them. So that's the point.
You're not going to get there. I can't imagine how it helps the United States, um, by doing what he's doing. It's a month now since he was sworn in, and the U.S. is no longer the leader of the free world. And I don't feel it's going to be the leader. It's not going to be able to resume leadership. What Joe Biden did when he came in office after Trump, he said, America is back. Well, I don't think that'll work now. I think even if there was a Democratic president, which, we'll see what happens, but even if there was a Democratic president or some president that doesn't take Trump's positions on these things, we are really pariah. We are a pariah country. No, nobody can say the U.S. has leadership. It may be a hegemon in some, military ways or some economic ways, but that's declining too. Look what he's doing domestically with the army. Look what he's doing with the federal civil service. Look what he's doing with all those agencies. We wind up with no influence in many countries, maybe most countries, and we are not reliable. We are not trustworthy. At the end of the day, we don't have any friends. I can't imagine how that helps us. That has got to be the worst possible turn of events. And I guess if you shake it and bake it, what Trump seems to be trying to do, and successfully, is destroying the liberal world order. That leads to war, and I think one of his, apparent goals is to side with Russia and to divide the world in three parts. Trump in this continent, Putin in all of Europe and in all the Russian territory, and Xi Jinping in Asia. And I
Mhm.
think that's kind of where he's going, but that is not he's not going to get there, in my view. And the question I'm concerned with is what happens to Ukraine, which is the moral high ground. It seems like he's really trying to bust Ukraine's chops. He's trying to cause Ukraine to lose this war almost immediately. This is how, this is the result that he is going to hand us and hand Europe. And I don't know how that can be avoided. I don't think it'll be too long when, Putin takes over all of Ukraine and Europe is terrified that Putin will go against Poland and the Baltics and for that matter, Germany and points west. So what we have is a crisis, and the U.S. is not only helping Europe on that crisis, it's hurting Europe and helping the enemy of Europe, that is Putin. So, what are your thoughts? What are your projections on what's going to happen here with this quote peace agreement?
Yeah, Jay, the peace agreement is that Russia has not been the aggressor. So Russia is free of all blame, and it has to just now decide how to end the war. That is it. And Zelensky has graduated to creating a NATO of his own. He's arranging a security um, uh, coalition of European leaders and himself uh, to counter NATO. That NATO, he doesn't need NATO anymore. He has his own little institution. So you have kind of, like you said, chaos leads to chaos. It's making him do silly things. Zelensky cannot form another institution which is at par with NATO or is capable of fighting Russia. And no European country is going to invest that much money, which US single handedly invests in the NATO. And literally, NATO helps US maintain Europe as a base. So that gives kind of a far-reaching transatlantic scope for the US. But Zelensky has ambitions beyond his capacity, Jay. And that those ambitions are reflecting in his wrong decisions, in his stature as a diplomat. He's faltering very hard, and Putin has got no word. He's not speaking anything. He's keeping quiet because he knows the war is won. The war is his. The 20% Ukrainian territory is his right now. He can go for more. Slowly, steadily, without the prying eyes of the media, away from the eyes, it'll be house to house, getting into Russia. It's going to just step one by one. And Jay, there is the wrong thing that in this is that post-war Ukraine, they forget about post-war Ukraine reconstruction. They're still talking of weapons. They're still talking of. There is a big need to reconstruct this with the help of the US. You have to look at those parts. And if the US and Russia decide to do post war reconstruction without the consent of Ukraine and without Europe, it's going to be a totally different map that we are going to see, Jay. It's going to be divide this territory between you and me.
Well, transactional, but it's really strange that since the Marshall Plan after World War II, and with all the money that USAID has given over the years, it's all grant. It's all
Hmm?
grant. It's not repayable. It was never repayable. It was soft power. It was soft diplomacy. It made us the city on the hill. It made us the world leader. Um, and Europe sees it the same way. Western Europe sees it the same way. If we give money or weapons to Ukraine, we do it, as a grant. And for Trump now, after the fact, after the fact, there was never a discussion of this before. All of a sudden, he wants it back. And
Hmm.
that's like saying we want all the Marshall Plan money back. That's like saying we want all the USAID money back. If we ever gave you money for health or welfare or to save starving children, we want it back. That is so outrageous. It's just unbelievable. No, if you have a loan, you call it a loan at the inception, not long after the fact. Entirely different. So I'm very concerned. And here, part of what is happening here is that Trump has a mandate that he expands beyond, what any voter thought he would do. This wasn't on the agenda. Wasn't part of his platform. He said he was going to make peace for Ukraine. My last question to you is, what effect does Trump's machinations in Europe is destroying the relationship with Europe, which is what he's done. He's done. Notice I don't talk about the future. He's already done it. What effect does that have on his popularity, on his political appeal in the United States? It's all an echo chamber, right?
Jay, it's seeming like he's doing so many things at one time. So he is proactive. That's the entire scenario or the reflection of him. He's never been a reactionary president. He's been a proactive president. That is the kind of impression that he's giving. But he's causing the entire world to react. He has such policies, and he's putting Ukraine in such a fix that they will have to surrender. He is hurting Zelensky on his political stature. He is hurting Zelensky on his political future because there is a lot of opposition in Ukraine, and he trying to bypass it by having no elections. Take it back to that point, Jay, when Israel was defending against Hamas. Netanyahu was under pressure to have elections. So even in that heavy bombardment on 7-8 fronts, Netanyahu was still expected to have elections. Zelensky wants to bypass that. And Trump, by causing this kind of chaotic decisions, Jay, and he causes those reactionary chaotic decisions, entire world is in such a phase that you don't know what's going to happen next. Because excluding Europe from the Saudi Arabia talks was an unprecedented move, Jay. Even if he didn't include, because we have seen Europe is an observer in every summit, in every conference, every bilateral. Also, you will have a European Union observer sitting with you. So they never exclude themselves from anything because they want to be in the middle of everything, but not take responsibility for any decisions. So they don't take decisions very quickly. They stay on the fringe, Jay, Europe. And that is where they have lost out in modern politics by trying to stay on the fence, not take responsibility, not take a proactive a challenge in global politics. They have tried to play it safe, always under the umbrella of the US, security blanket of the US, economic trade with Russia. You criticize Russia for Ukraine, but you continue doing business with them. So these are double standards that Europe set. Today they are being called out. So if Europe mends its ways and calls black is black, white is white, they would have much better chance with not Trump, say the next president who comes in. Vance is portraying himself to fall in the same lines as Trump. J. So has to be the entire red and blue that has to change. It's just not the they are having the same trajectory of decisions that would take place. So Europe has to learn, and Europe has to learn fast because they don't have space to maneuver. They're too small to have value in the international trade. And Trump makes these small, what do you say, gestures to, put countries by his side. China, Jay, the lowest number of migrants deported are from China. And Xi is loving it. So he's played to Xi. It's like a handshake. He's offered the first hand. He's deported everybody from every country, but Xi is safe. So Chinese are allowed in the US.
She is happy. She is empowered. And we'll see what happens. That's a subject for another show. But for this show, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much to our guest, Roopmati Khandekar, geopolitical analyst. I'm Jay Fidell, host of Global Connections. We've been discussing the tidal change in the US European relationship. Thanks to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again soon for the next one. Aloha.
Hello, Ajay. Thank you so much.